we mentioned the Belichick situation. This comes from an allegation by Brian Flores that his interview with the Giants was a sham, that Bill Belichick let him know ahead of time via the accidental text message that Brian Daboll was getting the job with the Giants before Brian Flores was ever even interviewed. And what a shock. Look, someone told me before this hiring cycle started, 70 to 80% of the owners, when hiring a new coach, they know who that coach is going to be the moment they fire the one that they had just fired. 78 to 80% of the time. And the irony, and I never know if that word's being used correctly, this cycle did not have that predetermination, that knowledge of who the guy was going to be when the dust settled on the hiring process. But still, that's how it works. And with the Giants, at some point before they interviewed Brian Flores, according to the allegation, they knew they were hiring Brian Daboll. I don't think they knew they were hiring Daboll when they fired Joe Judge, but at some point after that, and before interviewing Flores, they settled on Brian Daboll. So this really is amazing. What I've done is I've sent a text to the NFL seeking comment, haven't gotten a response. I asked Stacey James, the Patriots PR director, I need a comment on the Flores lawsuit if you have one. He said I wouldn't anticipate one. I sent one to Patrick Smythe, the Broncos PR director. Just let me know if you have a comment on the Flores allegations. And he said, of course, we need to see if the Dolphins have any response. But the Giants are the ones that do have a response. Do we have the Giants' response? We do have a Giants statement on Flores. We are pleased and confident with the process that resulted in hiring Brian Daboll. We interviewed an impressive and diverse group of candidates. The fact of the matter is Brian Flores was in the conversation to be our head coach until the 11th hour. Unfortunately, we hired the individual we felt was most qualified to be our next head coach. Now, look, that is not a surprising statement. That's what they're going to say. No one ever comes out and says, you caught us. That's the challenge of handling cases like this. I handled cases like this. You put people on the witness stand, and, it's funny because what you'll get is this suggestion that, well, are you really saying, counselor, that all of these people would come into court and lie under oath? The reality is the lie gets told long before they go to court. The lie gets told when they come up with their story when no one's under oath and they lock into it. They're never going to admit to it. That's why you have to prove these cases very delicately with circumstantial evidence. You have to catch people in inconsistent stories. You have to show that they're not telling the truth when they're trying to tell a consistent and cohesive lie. You have to show that there was someone who isn't in the protected class who was treated differently than the person in the protected class, whether it's race, age, religion, any type of gender discrimination, sexual harassment, any type of different treatment based upon different characteristics. And it's tough. It's difficult. I did it for a long time, and it is a fight because they are never going to admit to it. I guarantee you one thing. The last thing we're going to have from the NFL is a statement that reads like this: oops, sorry, we made a mess and now we're going to clean it up. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. And I'll be interested to see, Charean, whether or not there is an owner who is willing to buck the league and say, I'm hiring Brian Flores. I don't think it's going to happen. I'll tell you what. We assume the Saints aren't in play. I wouldn't assume that Gail Benson is going to slam that door. After the way that she believes and the Saints believe they've been screwed by the league dating back to Bountygate, this is the perfect opportunity for her to stick it to the league. Now, the problem is, the concern is the league will find a way to stick it to the Saints going forward. But she's one along with Mark Davis. Those are the two that would stand out to me as the ones inclined at least to ponder the possibility of hiring Flores to stick it to the league and to be able to say, we're doing the right thing.
Well, and I also would look toward the Texans if there's going to be a team to do it with their ties to the Patriots and their ties to Brian Flores. But I think all signs probably point to Josh McCown. But if they're going to go the Patriots way, maybe that is a team that you look to hire Brian Flores. Now, if I'm Brian Flores, I'm not even sure I take that job. But if you want to get back in the lead and have your lawsuit too, that's might be a way to do it. But Mike, the most interesting thing to me in this lawsuit, and of course we haven't had time to digest all of it, but he found out from Bill Belichick by mistake, who was trying to text Brian Daboll that congratulations on getting the Giants job, and it goes through the whole thing, and he finally figures out it's Brian Flores that he's talking to. That was 3 days before Flores' interview, and during that interview, Flores alleges that one of the front office guys in the Giants organization says, hey, maybe we can even get Brian Daboll as your offensive coordinator because he doesn't like Sean McDermott. So he might be willing to come as your offensive coordinator. So that was laughable to me that they had already made this decision based on Brian Flores' allegations, and yet they're telling him who his offensive coordinator might be. But let's spin this thing forward. Mike, you're the lawyer. I want to know, how long does this play out, and does the NFL end up settling this lawsuit with its teams for Brian Flores, and how does this change the Rooney Rule? What happens now?
Well, chaos, basically, behind the scenes. They have to figure out exactly. Seriously, they have to figure out how they're going to deal with this. And the lawyers from these white shoe firms, these big corporate firms, they are programmed to fight. They are programmed to work the file. They are programmed to do whatever they can to bill and bill and bill. I worked for a firm like that. I worked for Jones Day right out of law school. They love nothing more than what they call, and I was in the meetings when they used this term, I'll never forget this term, a cost-insensitive client. You want somebody who is the tiger who has been gotten by the tail and is not going to ever question how big the invoice is every month, and you can put a team of lawyers on it, and they can milk that cow, and that is how they make their money, and that's why they are going to fight, because the NFL is going to be inclined to fight. Everybody who gets sued, the first inclination is, screw you, you're wrong, we're right, how dare you accuse, how dare you accuse us? We are Big Shield. We are the NFL. We do everything the right way. Hey, we better make sure we got our ducks in a row. We do everything the right way. That's the mindset. And the law firms will stoke that. And they will fight. And they will fight. And they will fight. And they will spend money. And they will never admit. And they will appeal to the highest court in the land. They haven't learned their lesson post-St. Louis litigation. They went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court to try to force that case into arbitration. They will fight, and they will fight, and they will fight, and they'll never admit. You can't admit. Even if you're guilty, you can't admit it. They won't admit it. It'll be interesting to see what they do. But, the best thing to do would be to settle it today. Now, your white shoe law firm isn't going to be able to make the money to buy more white shoes. And I don't know why they call it a white shoe law firm, but they do. But they're leaving a lot of money in the file if they settle it today. But, hey, NFL, you want some free advice from the recovering lawyer who knows a thing or two about how you do business because he's been paying close attention to it for the last 20 years? I'd settle that lawsuit today. I would sit down with Brian Flores and I'd say, what do you want? You want a team? What do you want? How much? You tell us what you want. We got because number one, it's the right thing to do. But number two, they are caught. They are busted. It is over. And here's the other side of it, too. And this is where I feel bad for Brian Flores. What they will now do is they will dig into every nook and cranny of Brian Flores' life, looking for anything they can use to discredit him, to make him look bad, to make him look like a liar, to make him look untrustworthy, to make him look in any way other than someone who is standing up for truth and justice and fighting against the systemic racism that has occurred in the NFL for years, as evidenced by all the hires that have been made by the teams over the years. So I'd settle it tonight if I was the NFL. They won't, but I would settle this case tonight.
Well, here's another question, Mike. Let's say you're the lawyers for Brian Flores. Do you go out and try to get Eric Bieniemy and some other guys to join this lawsuit who have been passed up for these jobs at this point and make it a class action lawsuit against the NFL?
Well, it is a class action. Now, it's a class action to the extent that Brian Flores is representing all similarly situated individuals. They don't have to be named. I think he's hoping, based upon his statement, that others will join him in this cause, that others will step up and say, you can't do this. And frankly, there's a lot of ways this can go. The NFL has assumed that no one would ever do this because the simplest explanation is, anyone who does it is trading in his career. He's going to be ostracized. He's going to be treated like Colin Kaepernick. And we're going to start hearing certain people say he was never a very good coach anyway. He doesn't really want to coach. All the Kaepernick talking points, you just massage them a little bit and they're going to become Brian Flores talking points. I guarantee you there's going to be people in the media who are pushing this crap. And the NFL, so I hope it doesn't go that way. But if it plays out like Kaepernick, you're going to start hearing all sorts of things. Oh, Brian Flores didn't really want a job. If he really wanted a job, he wouldn't have filed this lawsuit. He'd have gone to work as a defensive coordinator or something. You're going to hear that. But maybe, just maybe, he will inspire other black coaches who have been overlooked, who have been passed over. Eric Bieniemy, Raheem Morris. We can put the list together. Maybe he will inspire them to say, I am joining you in this litigation. And look, all Brian Flores did was admit to things that he's privy to as somebody who's been in the NFL all these years. You think Eric Bieniemy couldn't tell some stories? You think Raheem Morris couldn't tell some stories? You think some of the other candidates, white or black, couldn't tell some stories? And that's the other side of it, too. It's going to be chaos once people have to testify under oath. This thing, and again, settle it tonight, because this thing could get very interesting very quickly. And it's time for the reckoning. It really is. It's time for the NFL to admit it won't. But it really is time for the NFL to admit that over the course of decades, it has failed to engage in proper hiring practices. The Rooney Rule has, and the chapter in Playmakers talks about all the times where people have found a way around it. Remember, Matt Millen got fined for failing to comply with it because he knew he was hiring Steve Mariucci in 2003. Jerry Jones hired Bill Parcells with a courtesy telephone call to Dennis Green, and they forced a change of the rules. Daniel Snyder was hiring Mike Shanahan to replace Jim Zorn, and they got around the Rooney Rule in that case by interviewing Jerry Gray from the staff before Zorn was fired. That it came out that Jerry Gray was interviewed, so that complied with the Rooney Rule. And then most recently, the Jack Del Rio for John Gruden swap. They conjured together some compliance with the Rooney Rule after the fact. So the evidence is there. The gun's been smoking. The gun's been firing every cycle. The evidence is there. This other stuff just makes it something that will give us fodder for discussion for weeks, if not months to come, Charean.
Yeah, and another one was the Cowboys with Jason Garrett. They had an in-house interview with Ray Sherman, and that was complying with the Rooney Rules at the time. But it was obvious that they were just complying with the rule. They weren't bringing in anybody outside the organization to sit down and have a real conversation because they were going to hire Jason Garrett. And there's just too many examples of this. I mean, you can go to almost every team and point to one that it's happened where they've just complied with the Rooney Rule to comply with the Rooney Rule and already had in mind who they were going to hire. As you said, most of the time when you fire a head coach, you have an idea in your head who you're going to hire, who you want to hire, because if you don't get somebody you consider better, why fire the head coach that you have? So you have somebody in mind. There's no question about that. And most of the time, frankly, as we've seen, that's a white head coach. We've seen white head coaches hired repeatedly over black head coaches year after year after year. As you said, goes back 50 years. But I remember sitting here with you, Mike, when Brian Flores was fired, the Dolphins fired him, and we were on here and we said, he'll have a job. He'll get one of these jobs. And here we sit weeks later, and he's not going to get any of these jobs. And I don't think he would have gotten them even before this lawsuit. But here we sit, and we thought he was one of the best candidates in this hiring cycle, and yet he's being passed over for the job. I think he has a great case simply because of that.
Remember, I want to choose my words carefully here. I'm just floating out an idea that came to me. I'm not suggesting that anyone do anything whatsoever. But I remember after one of the police shootings, the one in Wisconsin that happened summertime of 2020, the NFL was not yet in season, but there was a real conversation about how the players would react, specifically to an incident like that happening during football season. At one point, there was talk that maybe players actually wouldn't play in a game as protest of one of these police shootings that killed a black or brown American. I wonder how players are going to react to this. We got one game coming up in 12 days. I wonder what players are going to think of this when they understand what the allegations are. If they take the time, and this is the dead week, this is the time to do a little research if they're so inclined. What are the players going to say, white or black? What are they going to say about this? I'm not thinking that any type of a work stoppage for the Super Bowl is even remotely on the radar screen. I don't think that would happen in a million years. But I also didn't think the lawsuit would happen in a million years either. So there's plenty of things that may happen in a million years that I didn't think were ever going to happen in a million years. All I'm saying is we have to factor into this. After everything that happened in the summer of 2020, remember that very powerful video that the players put together that forced Roger Goodell to respond in kind. And there were some questions about whether or not he really did promise to do everything they asked for. Remember all that from June of 2020. It's going to be interesting to see what the players think about it. That's all I'm saying for now. And we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. Because you know what? There's plenty of media availability that will be happening next week in advance of the Super Bowl. Now, I don't know when the players are going. I don't think they're going to be there all week. There's been some talk about that. So it may not be a daily thing. But there will still be plenty of Zoom conferences, and the coaches will have their talking points. The coaches aren't going to talk about it, but the players, it'll be interesting to see what they have to say. Very interesting to see what they have to say about this, especially as more of these facts come out, more of these allegations come out, and more of this gets digested, Charean.
Yeah, and there will be Radio Row, too, so you'll have players from other teams talking about this as the week goes on. And I'll be interested to hear from Dolphins players. What do they think after reading this, reading some of the details in this? What do Dolphins players think? And I'm sure we'll see some social media activity on this, too. So Stephen Ross, it's going to be interesting how he handles all this. They still have a head coaching opening right now. They haven't replaced Brian Flores. So we'll see how that plays out as we go forward, Mike. But there's going to be a lot of things in the next 2 weeks that are going to be focused on this. It's not going to overshadow the Super Bowl, but certainly it's going to be questions during Super Bowl week for these players about the lawsuit.
I am reminded of a line near the end of A Few Good Men where Jack Nicholson says to Tom Cruise, "You have messed with the wrong Marine." The NFL has messed with the wrong Marine in Brian Flores.
Yeah.
He has lit the fuse, and he knows where it's going to go. And it's going to, when it hits the bomb, it's already hitting the bomb. There's a whole line of bombs that are going to go off in the wake of this. It's a lot to digest.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.